Welcome to the Cambridge Creatives Q&A with Matthew White. Hi, I'm Harriet, Screenings and Executive Officer of Cambridge Creatives.
And I'm Claire, I'm Social Media and Executive Officer. Thank you for supporting us. We're a student-run creative collective and we curate a series of talks with world-renowned professionals in film, TV and theatre. So please follow our Facebook page if you want to find out about future events and opportunities. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, please type them into the Q&A function below. It should be on the bottom bar there, not the chat. And we will read them out for you at the end. Please bear with us if there are any technical difficulties and let us know in the chat if you have any problems hearing or seeing us. We can fix things quickly. But yeah, thanks and enjoy the Q&A.
Matthew White is an Olivier Award-winning director, writer and actor. In 2004, he was nominated for an Olivier Award for his performance in the musical Ragtime. He has also performed in West End productions of Chicago, Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis. Matthew has directed Olivier Award-nominated productions of Sweet Charity and Little Shop of Horrors, amongst many other musicals. In 2013, he adapted and directed Top Hat, which won 3 Olivier Awards, including Best New Musical. He recently directed the tour of the Addams Family, starring Carrie, Fletcher and Cameron Blakely. We are honoured to have this acclaimed creative speak. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
When did you know that you wanted to work in theatre?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I did sort of fair amount of stuff, a lot of music when I was at school, and some acting, mainly in sort of operetta and things. I went to an all boys school, so I ended up playing women in Gilbert and Sullivan operettas and things like that. So that was my first taste of drama. And then when I went to university, I was just saying to you two that I went to Keys College and studied English, and I did loads and loads of drama at college. So yeah, that's where I got my taste for it really, and did loads of stuff at the ADC and at the Arts Theatre, and yeah, I mean I spent a lot more time doing those things than I did doing my subject, that's for sure. And so that's where I got a taste for it, and then I became part of the cabaret group, and we in those days, back in prehistoric times, we had to have equity cards, and so in order to have an equity card, it was really weird. In order to have an equity card, you had to prove that you'd worked professionally, but you couldn't work professionally unless you had an equity card. It was mad. So, but I was in a cabaret group, and we did loads of things like May balls and outside gigs, and got paid for them. And one day we were just sitting around, and somebody said, "Oh, you know what? I think we've got enough contracts to get an equity card." So we sort of blithely sent our stuff off, and indeed these equity cards came back through the post. So we were really, really lucky, because people struggled for years to get their cards, and they kind of almost fell into our laps. So I came out of college having an equity card, which made a lot of difference. So that's it was definitely at Cambridge really that my ideas of going into the theatre started to kind of, I suppose, crystallise.
So as well as getting the equity card, would you say that your time at Cambridge doing theatre prepared you for your future projects and the career you're in now?
I think so. Yeah, I do think so, because I suppose the thing about Cambridge is the amount of extracurricular stuff you can do and the amount of productions you can be in. So, had I gone to drama school for 3 years, which I'm sure would have been great, I wouldn't have got the same opportunity to be in as many productions as I was at Cambridge. So in that sense, just being able to do it was my training. And I did actually, when I left college, I did half think, should I go to drama school? Should I maybe go to one of the music schools? I was sort of thinking of doing opera at the time. And I just didn't get around to it. And actually, I think by and large, what I'd learned, at college was enough to sort of kickstart me. And then I just learned the rest as I went along, I think, with a lot of luck involved, I would say.
And if you could, is there any information or advice you'd give to your former self, or you as a student, that people might like to hear?
I think if I was advising myself, I would say don't pigeonhole yourself too much. because I think that, I don't know about now, but certainly when I was there was a bit of a sort of tendency to go, oh, I either do this or I do that, you know. I was in the, I did a lot of musical theatre and light opera and stuff, bits and pieces, the odd play, but not that much actually. I kind of wish I'd been a bit braver and just sort of said, you know, of course I can be in a play, that's fine, you know, and really sort of gone for it, but I didn't. I sort of tended to stick where I felt most comfortable, and that was great. I had wonderful experiences, but I think maybe looking back, I could have sort of challenged myself a bit more, possibly. So that might be the main bit of advice I would give. I think, yeah, I think that would be it. If that's a decent enough answer for you.
Definitely. So you said that your first kind of job out of uni was this cabaret. Did you then stick with theatre and then just go and, like you said, with a bit of luck, carry on with that, or did you try out different other things as well?
I have never really had a proper job in my life. So I didn't actually really. I mean, I had actually to be fair, in my year off, I was in the box office at the Albert Hall. That's really the only proper sensible job I've ever had. When I came out of college, I came to London, and I still wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. It wasn't just like it was an absolute shoo-in that I was going to be an actor. I was still sort of, you know, kind of not entirely sure. I partly thought I might want to be a television presenter. So that was kind of, you know, in the back of my mind. And my first job actually was as an accompanist at the Italia Conti Drama School. So I accompanied the ballet lessons, which was really stressful. And because I think those the pianists are amazing at those places, you know, and they can play anything. You know, they just need to be told, just, you know, we need I don't know, a pavan or a waltz or whatever, and they could just play, you know. But I can't do that. I can sight read. So I used to have this tower of books, but by just sitting by me. So, and you know, and then the ballet master or mistress would say, you know, oh, we need this, and I'd be sort of scrabbling around trying to find something which was suitable, or if it wasn't suitable, I'd just have to play it in that style. It was really sort of I don't think I was brilliant at that, but that was my first job. And then I just auditioned for something, and in those days there were quite a lot of open auditions, and you know, we used to avidly read the Stage magazine, and at the back were all the auditions, and the big shows would all have open auditions from time to time, and I saw one for Evita, the tour of Evita. So I went along and dutifully stood, you know, at the back of a massively long queue. I think it was at Her Majesty's actually, which is where Phantom has been playing for the last 35 years. And it was one of those classic things, you know, you took your piece of music and you went up on stage, and I think they asked for sort of 16 bars or something, and you stood in a spotlight and you couldn't really see out in the auditorium who was there. And you sang your little thing and then kind of said thank you very much and walked off stage. And quite miraculously, I don't know how I got the job. So I went off on an 8-month tour of Evita, which was all around the country, and we went to Ireland, and we went to Scotland, and we went all over the place. It was fabulous, wonderful, and that was my first job. So that came out of an open audition. I was really lucky. So I didn't have an agent at that point, so I had no other real way of getting work. So again, you know, that was my first bit of luck, really, I suppose. Just I happened to be, you know, the right sort of look for that show. I happened to have the right sort of voice, whatever. So that was great. I had a really good time. Learned a lot on that job, I think. And it's quite excruciating. I don't do this anymore, but I used to write a diary, and all the way through that particular experience, I was writing a diary, and it's I've only just recently reread it because, you know, I've actually got time during lockdown, and it's fairly excruciating, but clearly I was learning a lot as I went, and picking things up, and, you know, how to and how not to. So that was great. So that was my first professional job.
Speaking of perhaps like interesting like professional experiences, you were briefly a children's TV presenter for the BBC. Like, how was that for you?
It was great. Yeah, so I sort of, like probably lots of people of my generation, I wanted to be a presenter on Blue Peter, really. And so I sent off all my stuff to them, and I got all these replies basically saying, thanks but no thanks, because they no doubt got hundreds and thousands of submissions. And in fact, I've still got, in our loo, that I've got this sort of collage of rejection letters, which basically it charts all the things that I didn't get into, which was quite a lot. And my favourite one of all is this refers actually not to Blue Peter, but to Playdays, which is the thing I ended up doing later. But it says something like, it takes a very special person to be Peggy Patch's friend, and I'm afraid this time you weren't successful. So I wasn't even good enough to be Peggy Patch's friend. But anyway, no. So I did subsequently then get asked to do it, and so I did a couple of series of it, and it was very intense filming and a lot of learning as well, because we didn't have stuff on Autocue or anything. So I just had to learn these quite long episodes, and there was quite a lot of storytelling in it as well. So again, having to learn these quite long sections of prose, and so that was quite an interesting learning experience. It was basically me and a parrot who sat at my shoulder, and yeah, we had fun. And I did that, and I did the children's channel for a little bit as well. So I sort of dipped my toe into that thing, but I think my theatre sort of career was taking off at the same time, and I think I ended up sort of being more seduced by that, and probably being more successful at it as well, So yeah, that's where I ended up going into theatre rather than the much more lucrative area of television.
I mean, they say don't work with children and animals, but parrots.
I tell you, she was like Lady Macbeth. She was a nightmare. She really was. But no, so that was, it was fun. So I think in the early parts of my career, I was sort of, I was trying this and I was trying that, just seeing what really, sort of made me tick. And I think I sort of ended up in musical theatre, which I suppose was a natural place for me to go, because I'd always been quite musical. I'd done loads of music when I was younger, a real interest in music, and musical theatre sort of fitted the bill really, and it was fun. So yeah, so that's where I gravitated, and so from my experiences on Evita, I then went and did a bit of rep, which was great. Again, working in one specific theatre, and having a chance to sort of get to know how the theatre works. It's not like touring, where touring you're moving from place to place and meeting a whole lot of different people every week or every 2 weeks or whatever. Whereas rep is different. You get to know the people who run the building and work the building, and that's a different experience. So that was again very, very useful. And then actually I have got quite a good story here. But this was my first West End job, which again, this is where luck comes in, because I was doing a production in rep of a musical called Sherlock Holmes the Musical, and they were doing open auditions for Les Mis, and I'd been dying to be in Les Mis, because Les Mis was the big show at the time. It had been running for about 3 years, I think. So it was the massive hit. It was at the Palace Theatre, and I saw, open the back of the stage, and there were the open auditions, and I was in Exeter doing Sherlock Holmes. And Exeter is a bloody long way from London, and and I had shows every night, so I couldn't just I couldn't miss a show. So I got up really, really, really early one day, got the train to London, and went to the theatre, which was the Palace where Les Mis was running, and there was an absolutely massive queue snaking right the way around the building several times. And so I went to the back and just sort of stood there thinking, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to get seen before I have to get back on the train and go back to Exeter. So I went to the stage door, being, cheeky and young and naive, and said to the stage doorman, I'm terribly sorry, but I have a show this evening and I have to get back for it. So I just wondered whether I could maybe just get to the front of the queue. And he quite rightly just went, "Oi, get to the back." He just had absolutely no time for me at all, quite rightly. But just at that moment, as I was being told off by the stage doorman, the stage door opened and somebody that I knew walked out from within, and she was actually in the show I was in at the time, Sherlock Holmes the musical, but she had been playing Madame Thénardier in Les Mis several seasons back, and she'd just come up to London to do some shopping and to see her mates who were still involved with the show, one of whom was the associate director. And she said, what are you doing here? And it was a complete surprise to see her. And I said, well, I'm just trying to get an audition, but I can't because the queue is massive. I just won't get in. And she just said, darling, just come with me. And she literally just took my hand, took me straight through the stage door, much to the astonishment of the stage doorman. Through I went, and she took me up onto the stage, and she just said to Ken Caswell, who was the resident director, just said, Ken, I was afraid there's someone you have to see. He's got to get back on a train, so he needs to be seen now. And that's what happened. I auditioned, and I got the job. And I then subsequently discovered that the guy who was leaving the job looked almost identical to me. So I just happened to luck out on in two ways there. One was that Myra was there and, literally just dragged me into the building. And the other one was that I just was pretty much the, identikit sort of person to take over the role. So, yeah, I mean, luck does play an enormous, part of it all, I think. So that's my Les Mis story.
Amazing. I'm looking to see if anyone looks exactly like me now. Great idea. We wanted to talk a little bit about directing, especially musicals, obviously. And we wanted to ask kind of, how did you refine your craft and learn how to direct? Was it more kind of on the job, or did anyone mentor you or teach you?
So I suppose the short answer to that is that I definitely was mentored, and it tended to be with the people who I was working with, so the directors I was working with. And so quite early on, I became a resident director on two shows. One of them was Carousel. I wasn't in it actually, and it was a show that was at the National Theatre, and it was transferring to the West End. And I hadn't done that job before, and I got asked to do it. I think because Cameron Mackintosh sort of vaguely knew who I was because I'd been in Les Mis already, and so I was asked to do this resident director job, and because of that, and I'd sort of cut the long story short because it's quite a long, involved story, this one, but I was asked to then take the show and put the show on in Japan, and so I got this extraordinary opportunity to watch Nick Heitner, who was the director, directing this show, and then essentially to do what we call a copycat production, abroad with a different cast, in fact with a Japanese cast in this case. And so I learned enormously just from watching Nick. And then, of course, I learned massively from doing it. Excuse me, I'm just about to asphyxiate. So that was an amazing learning curve. Quite scary, but incredible, because it was a big production. And essentially, once I was over in Japan, I was sort of not on my own, because I was surrounded by supportive people like musical directors and choreographers and things. But Nick Heitner was nowhere to be seen, so I basically had to sort of helm it. So that was incredible. So that was one really fortunate experience. Another one was working with John Caird, who's the co-director of Les Mis. I did a show called Children of Eden with him, and again he sort of halfway through the run, which wasn't very long actually, he asked me if I would resident direct the show, and he was fantastic. He was so helpful to me and supportive of me. I was just at that point starting to sort of flex my muscles a little bit in the sort of directing thing, and I was putting on a few shows on the Fringe, and John was so helpful to me. He used to take me out for lunch and talk to me about the process of it. He actually gave me a bit of money to help me finance the production as well. So he was incredible. I'm still in contact with him actually. He lives quite close to where I live in London, and we still sort of meet up for coffee occasionally. And so he was a mentor, definitely. I also assisted Simon Callow, the actor, on a production of Pajama Game, which again was another really interesting experience of being able to watch somebody else do their stuff. So I think being a resident stroke associate director was really, really helpful. And then the other sort of strand to that is that I started to put these shows on the Fringe. So I produced them and directed them. A tiny venue called The Link, which probably seated about 60 people. And I did a production of Starting Here, Starting Now, which is a review, musical review. And I did a production of Two Gentlemen of Verona, the Shakespeare play. And because of Starting Here, lots of people came to see it. I had some wonderful people in the cast who were also sort of quite, not high profile, but they'd been in, West End shows and things. So they had a following, if you like. So we got really good attendance, got some nice reviews and stuff. And on the back of that, a guy called Paul Saby, who ran the music theatre course at Mountview Theatre School, he came to see it, and then he subsequently asked me to direct some stuff at Mountview. And then over the years, I directed probably, 10, 12 productions at Mountview. And again, that was really part of my learning process, because I was able to work with young actors who were all keen, who all did whatever I wanted them to do. They weren't stroppy, cynical older actors. They were young, dynamic, So a lot of my directing, I suppose, probably came from there, I think, my experience. So yeah, two different strands. And the other thing is just being an actor, being in the room, watching how a director runs a room. And you just, and inevitably, I'm sure you both know this, you just learn. You learn what you feel works and what you feel doesn't work. And so that was just equally valuable. So I've never had any formal training as a director, but I think, I was able to kind of pick things up as I went along, really.
And do you have a kind of set approach to working with actors on things like characterization, or does it depend on the actor and their, like you said, whether they're new, fresh face, want to do anything you want them to, on their experience or like their style or personality?
Yeah, it totally depends on who I'm working with. It depends on what the piece is and who the people are. So if it's a young cast, I probably am more likely to improvise stuff, and because they don't mind being put out of their comfort zone in the same way that, well, in a way that older actors sometimes don't like. I think I've certainly been in a situation where older actors really resent being put into any sort of situation where they might feel uncomfortable or not be the best person in the room. There was one specific example. I mean, I won't mention who the guy was, but I was doing a production of Candide, and he was playing one of the leads. And when I said, that I was intending to improvise around various areas of the thing, he point blank said to me, "I will not do improvisations." And I kind of thought, oh, right, okay, I have to revise what I'm thinking for today's rehearsal then, but he made it perfectly clear that he just wouldn't do it. And that was fine, actually, as long as, I think as long as you know where you stand, it's fine. And what you don't want to do, I think, in a rehearsal is make people feel intensely uncomfortable, because it doesn't make for a happy experience for people. So I think you do have to listen to what's there and who's there, and you have to glean pretty quickly whether this is useful or not. I mean, equally, I've worked with, I did a production of The Boyfriend quite recently, and I had a leading actress who's extremely experienced and, just done everything. And she had no problems at all improvising and loved it, really enjoyed it. So yeah, it just depends on the people and sometimes the piece. I think some pieces, impro and stuff like that is more useful. I did a production of the last 5 years, Jason Robert Brown's last 5 years, which, for those of you who don't know, is sort of episodic and works backwards for the female character and forwards for the male character. And because of that, they're not necessarily on stage. I mean, in some productions they are, in some productions they're not. But the fact is, they don't have dialogue with each other. And we found actually improvising really helpful with that show. It's sort of filling in the gaps, which we didn't see, was really helpful. And we spent probably a good week improvising before we actually got down to sort of nitty gritty. So that was interesting, but it doesn't work for every show. I would say on a first day, I tend to do very basic theatre games with people, and that's really just so that people can get to know each other really quickly. I like the idea of everybody getting a chance to meet everybody else in the room. So if we can find a way of doing that quickly and entertainingly, I do that, because I just think it's particularly when you've got a show where maybe the principals don't necessarily interact with the ensemble very much, and therefore they won't necessarily be in the same room very much, and therefore they won't get to know each other. So the quicker you can get all that together, early in rehearsals, the better. And I have another little thing which I do on most productions, which is on the first day, I'll split them into groups, maybe 3 or 4 groups, and I'll give them a task in their groups, and I'll make sure that the group has some ensemble members and some principals in, and I'll ask one group to go and do some research on the period of the piece that we're doing. One might go and do some research on the writer. One might go and do research on fashion at the time, or whatever feels appropriate. But the great thing about that is it means they have to work together and quite quickly. And then I say I want a presentation maybe at the end of the first week, and you can do it however you want to. The only stipulation is that every single person has to speak, and that's it. And the advantage of that is, it's just really to get them working together quickly, and actually, by and large, they really enjoy those projects. They love just sort of finding out all sorts of little details about the background to the show, and it's useful for me as well because I get to learn new stuff. So that's a good bonding thing, but I don't I don't spend days and days doing theatre games. I think there does come a point when those things become they have to be done for a reason. Just playing endless theatre games is no good to anybody. They have to be to do with creating a company, and once you've done that, then actually it's time to get on. And I think most actors want to get stuck into the script quite quickly, and actually the quicker you can get things up on their feet, the better, I think.
To say you've directed in like a great range, like as you've been describing, of like different theatres and spaces, like obviously all over the world, including Japan. So is there any place that you've like particularly enjoyed directing in, like any like memories you cherish of like a particular theatre?
Well, my favourite theatre has got to be the Chocolate Factory. It's called the Menier Chocolate Factory in London. It's south of the river, near the Globe Theatre, and I've done about 6 or 7 productions there. And I think what I love about the Chocolate Factory is that it's very flexible. So every production I've done has been different. Some have been in a traditional sort of cross arch. One has been in the round. The one I just did was with the audience on 3 sides. It's totally flexible. So the great thing about that is that you feel like you're sort of reinventing the space every time you walk in there, and it's intimate. So I think there's about 260, 70 seats, and like that. It's small, and it means that the audience is really up close and personal. And I think that's an experience that they love. And actually the actors do as well. So I've loved working there, and I've been given the opportunity to do some shows there, which I've always wanted to do. I know the producer quite well, and we've talked about various projects, and I've done I did Sweet Charity there. That's where it started, and Candide, and Little Shop of Horrors, and The Boyfriend, and some lovely productions. And so that has a very sort of special place for me. It is a very special place for me. I'm trying to think of other places. I mean, I think that's probably the one for me. I've also directed, this is a sort of quirky little place, but I've directed a couple of things in Vienna, at the English Theatre in Vienna, which is an old converted ballroom, and again has a real kind of atmosphere of its own. And that was quite a sort of special experience. It's not flexible at all. So it's all, yes, it's the audience is in a specific position, and it's front on, it's cross arch. There's hardly any space backstage, so you can't do really clever things with set, and it's got a lot of limitations. but it is lovely in the sense that it's very intimate, and it's in this sort of beautiful old ballroom, with a sort of little gallery bit. So that's I've got a sort of affection for that place as well. Yeah, I think that's probably it. I mean, I haven't I haven't directed there, but I love. I think my favourite theatre in London is the Palace, which is where we did Les Mis in the days when that's where it was. It's moved subsequently, but that's a beautiful, beautiful venue. But as I say, I haven't directed there, so Chocolate Factory would definitely be top, I think.
So this question might be a little bit harder because you've written like entire books on how to like successfully stage musicals. But if you had to pick like your number one tip or your best piece of advice, what would you go to? I mean, alternatively, for the people watching, if they don't get enough, you can just buy the book.
Buy the book. It's on Amazon.
Give it a taste.
I actually got a story about that as well, but because this is the second edition that's fairly recently come out of the book, and I did the first edition when I was quite young. It was 20 years ago, so I actually didn't have a huge amount of experience at the time. And then they asked me to do a revision of the book, and it basically meant rewriting the book completely, because my experience since then has been totally different. So anyway, the new book's better, I'm just saying. My top tip is, well, it's all about collaboration. It's all about collaboration as far as I'm concerned. So it's be a good collaborator. That's my tip. It's listen to people and work with people that inspire you, and really listen, actually, and allow people to do their jobs. That's the other thing, so if you've got a brilliant choreographer, then you need to respect that as a director. It's not about just having your stamp and going, this is my show. It's so not that. So it's all about collaboration and really letting other people in, and that goes for, it's not just, it's also lighting designer, the costume designer, the orchestrator. It's all those things, and allowing them to really understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and making sure they're part of the creative process, and then so you're not just dictating to them. I've always thought that this is, we're not called dictators, we're called directors. And in actual fact, even that's quite a misnomer, I think. I mean, facilitator might be a better expression, I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, it's all about respecting the people you're working with, and utilising their talents. And that also goes for the cast. Because, well, certainly from my experience as an actor, of being in shows which have been imported from the States, which has happened on a number of occasions for me. I've done Chicago and Kiss of the Spider Woman and something else, can't remember. But stuff which has been brought over, and you are literally expected to do exactly what the American cast did. And it's just soul destroying for any sort of creative person. It's what's the point? Unless you're using the talents of the people in the room, you can still get essentially the same result. You can still get the show to look, similar to how it did before. But unless you are, really trying to, use whatever that particular person brings into the room, then it's sort of a bit of a pointless exercise, I think. So I think that would absolutely be my number one. Would be collaboration.
And I was also wondering, do you prefer directing or performing? Does it depend on the show? Do you have a dream role?
So which one do I don't prefer either of them, actually. It sort of depends on what I'm doing and how long I've been doing the other one for. So, for example, I haven't been on stage now, not properly, for about 3 or 4 years. And so at the moment, I'm thinking I'd really like to, coming out of lockdown, whenever we're allowed back into the theatres, I would like to do something. It'd be really nice. But I don't know that I don't have a preference of one or the other. I mean, they're very, very different, I think. Directing, obviously, you're expected to, you're expected to have an opinion about everything. you're expected to be, you know, in some way in charge, and so there's a responsibility to that, and a pressure. There are different pressures being an actor, obviously, but I always think of it as being a bit like the difference between being in the playground, i.e., being an actor, and being, you know, on the staff in a school, you know, whether that's the head teacher or whatever. But that's for me, that's kind of the difference. So I think when you're an actor, it's just fun. When you're an actor, you know, being in the dressing room, getting to know everybody, and it's fun, and you can let your hair down and be a bit silly. Whereas I think you have to be slightly careful as a director in terms of quite how silly you become, and you know, I'm more conscious, for example, about, you know, if I'm going out to the pub with a cast as a director, I would be a little bit careful about drinking. I wouldn't drink too much. If I'm the actor in the show, anything goes, you know. Yeah, so I don't think I have a preference really, but I think they're both very different. They both sort of for me, they sort of tick different boxes. As far as roles are concerned, in musical theatre, I'd love to play Sweeney Todd, because probably everyone would, but I would absolutely love that. I love that show, and I think that part would be so much fun to play. I would love to play Frederick Egerman in A Little Light Music, which is also Sondheim. I love Sondheim, so really, you know, anything that he's written is pretty good. So in terms of musical theatre, that would be that. I have been doing some Zoom readings during Zoom play readings during lockdown, and discovering all these roles that I've never played and probably wouldn't be considered for in the real world. But so we just did a few weeks ago, we did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So I would love to play George in a production of that, because it's so meaty, it's so much fun. So that would be one. What else would I want to play as a sort of straight actor? I don't know. I'd love to be in The Inheritance. I'd love to either direct or be in The Inheritance, actually. I don't know whether either of you saw it, but it's the most extraordinary piece, and it's, you know, 9 hours long or whatever. And that would be quite a challenge, yeah, as a director or an actor, I think. I love Tennessee Williams, so I'd love to direct some Tennessee Williams. I've never done that. Glass Menagerie would probably be my top. Yeah, so there's a few there that I'd like to do, but yeah, it's actually been quite interesting, this lockdown play reading thing, because it's just reminded me how many amazing plays there are out there, and you know, how many great roles there are. So, you know, yeah, I'd love to. There's definitely an issue with, I mean, certainly when I was younger as an actor, you know, my main experience was musical theatre, and therefore being seen as a straight actor was very difficult. So, you know, I tended not to get auditions for straight stuff. And when I did, there was a real specific reason for that. So I did a play called The Glee Club. I was playing a minor, which seems unlikely, a northern minor. But it was partly because I could play the piano, and that character needed to play the piano. So that's probably why I got that role. But there's definitely, I'd love to say that it didn't still exist, that stigma, but it does, actually. And so I always try and encourage young performers to try and get a mixture of experience, and not get stuck in one area for too long, because I think people are quite short-sighted, and they will tend to pigeonhole you, I think. So yeah, so it's unlikely when lockdown unlocks that I will suddenly be asked to play all these amazing roles in straight theatre. But who knows, you know, we live in hope.
You never know, we can hope.
Exactly.
So moving on from your dream roles to your past roles,
yeah,
and going on to Ragtime. So Ragtime is a musical with like a very strong political message about racial injustice and social events, especially relevant like right now. Is this something that like drew you towards the musical?
Yes, the honest truth, or the honest answer is that what drew me to that show was actually, I didn't know it at all. And it was a friend of mine who'd seen it in New York. There was a massive production. The original production of it was a huge production. and he'd seen it, and he came back and said, Matt, there's a role which you'd be perfect for. So that's how I knew about it. So of course I then did my research, and then it transpired that it was coming over here. And and I suddenly, I was desperate to do it. So I did all the things that you do, which is you read the book and you get as much information as you possibly can. But yes, I mean, I in retrospect, I find it absolutely that the piece is absolutely fascinating. And as you say, it's really relevant now. I mean, I'd be quite surprised if somebody doesn't put it on once we get out of this lockdown situation. There hasn't been another. Well, no, that's not true. There was a fairly largish production of it about maybe 6 years ago at Regent's Park Theatre, but it hasn't been done in the West End since we did it, which is I think in 2005, something like that, quite a long time ago. But it is the most wonderfully rich piece because well, as you've said, it deals with so many interesting subjects, and it deals with real kind of compassion, I think, about all those different characters, even the kind of slightly crazy ones like mine. There's a compassion in the writing, I think, and it's also got a kind of epic quality to it as well. It's both personal and epic, and so as an actor, it's incredibly exhilarating to perform. And that one was a sort of hard-won prize for me because, as I say, I heard about it through the American production, and was desperate to be involved, and then went through the whole audition process, which was lengthy, as they often are, particularly with an American piece, because then they have to fly the Americans over, and you get recalled and recalled and recalled and recalled. It gets more and more stressful, and so I eventually did my final audition, and was so hoping I was going to get the part. I was so kind of invested in it by then, and I was doing an operetta in Amsterdam, and I got the phone call from my agent to say that I got the job, and I was absolutely sort of so happy and walking on air. It was an amazing feeling, and I was just thinking, oh my god, I can't believe it. I'm going to be in this mega show. It would have been my first largest role in the West End, and I was just over the moon about it. And that very evening I was watching CNN, and there was an article about a Canadian producer called Garth Drabinsky, and it was saying he'd just been arrested and through embezzlement. And who do you think was the producer of Ragtime? It was Garth Drabinsky. So the show was put on hold, and he was sent to prison. And so it seemed like the big dream was about to just evaporate. Well, it did evaporate. And it was about a year later, somebody got the great idea of doing it as a concert, a big concert at the Millennium Centre in Cardiff. And they decided to use all the people who'd been selected for the show. So there were people like Dave Willits and Maria Friedman, and a really good lineup of people. And they imported somebody from America who I think had done it over there to play Coal House. And anyway, we did this huge concert with a big sort of symphony orchestra at the Millennium Centre. It was rehearsed for a couple of weeks. It wasn't like a sort of, we weren't standing behind mics. We were costumed. We were essentially doing it, without a set, I suppose. The set was the musicians, I think. And because Maria Friedman was in it, her sister came to see it. And her sister, Sonia Friedman, who's now one of the biggest, theatre producers certainly in our country, and arguably in the States as well. And she came to see it, loved it, and decided to do the production in the West End. And she decided she used the same director, who was a guy called Stafford Arima, who had been, I think, the associate director of the Broadway one. But they decided to pare it right back, so it wasn't this kind of mammoth, sort of incredible sort of juggernaut of a show as it had been done in America, which was all sort of bells and whistles and amazing set and costume changes every second and all that. It was really pared down. We did it at the Piccadilly Theatre, which is a small theatre anyway, and we had a kind of floating orchestra. They were up on a level, and very little set. It was very sort of elegant, but very, very sparse. And so it was the antithesis of what they'd done in the States. It was beautiful, actually, really beautiful. So eventually, at long last, we sort of, the dream came true, but it was probably I don't know, a year and a half later since we'd auditioned originally. So yeah, so that was it was a kind of a real kind of journey, that one. And it didn't last for very long either. I think it only played for probably 3 or 4 months. It was there was the first, was it the first or the second? It was the first Gulf War happened at the same time. So suddenly there were no tourists in London, and so many shows closed, as we did. But it was an amazing experience, and I loved every second of it, playing that role, and in that just extraordinary piece of writing. So yeah, there you are. That's my very long-winded answer to a short, sharp question.
I mean, what a story! What so many plot twists I wasn't seeing coming.
Yep, that's my life. Welcome to my life.
I was going to say, you've like said before that the role of like mother's younger brother was like a very physical one. Like as an actor, how do you cope with these like physical demands of your roles? Like how do you manage to do it?
I think it was probably less physical, but more intense. It was really intense because he's a sort of stalker, and so I think I just felt it was tiring to play because of this kind of focus that character had. So it wasn't so much that he was flinging himself around. He wasn't, but it was just this incredible focus and an energy, that sort of inner, sort of burning energy that he had, which of course eventually in the story turns him into a terrorist. But how do I deal with those things? In the same way that you do with anything, really. You have to remember that you're doing a show, once or sometimes twice a day, and you have to sort of make sure you're match fit for that. So whether that means, I don't know, resting in the afternoon, or but you have to be physically and vocally really warmed up. So that's vital. It's obvious, but it's vital that you can't. I think when you're doing a West End show, particularly of that sort, you can't go out and get pissed the night before and have 3 hours sleep. It just impacts on the performance too much, and you do feel like you have a real responsibility to deliver the best performance you possibly can for every single performance, and so yeah, you have to take it seriously. So it's just to do with the way that you make sure that you eat properly, you drink properly, you exercise properly, and you keep at the top of your game as much as you can, because there is a danger of being, particularly I think when you're younger, of being just so kind of giddy with the whole thing. I think I was a bit giddy in Les Mis, actually. I think I was so excited to be there, and so that was a whole new experience, and I think probably I didn't look after myself in the way that maybe in retrospect I should have done. In fact, I lost my voice about 2 weeks into the show. Nothing came out, and it was because I didn't really know how to do it. I didn't know how to sustain that style of singing over any length of time. Because it's all such belty, high energy stuff, and I didn't have the requisite training. I'd had vocal lessons, but I hadn't ever learned to sing like that before. So that was actually quite. I've gone off tangent slightly, but that was a real learning curve. Actually, it was sort of making me realise that I wasn't going to get through a year of that without actually taking myself in hand and pacing myself. I think that was it. I was throwing myself at it and just sort of throwing this massive amount of energy at every performance and singing at the top of my voice whenever possible, and I just didn't have the technique to be able to deal with that. So that was a learning curve, and I think it meant that I had to sort of adjust very quickly, and I definitely came out of Les Mis having a much stronger voice than when I went in. So yeah.
Great. So soon we're going to have some questions from the audience. Please, anyone who's watching, please type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll read them out in a second. Whilst you're all thinking up questions and typing them in, I just wanted to ask a little bit about Top Hat. So how did you kind of get involved with Top Hat? Is it something that you thought about doing for a long time?
So no, not at all. It was something that was offered to me by the producer, who had been thinking about doing it for a long time. And I'd recently been asked by the same producer to do a version, to write an adaptation of a David Walliams novel, Mr. Stink, and turn it into a musical. So I've been working on that with this producer, and then this other thing came up, and he, and I know it had been percolating for quite a long time, because getting the rights for that show was really difficult, because it was a big, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movie. And anyway, eventually he secured the rights, and then asked me whether I would be interested in directing it. And I didn't know it, actually. I sort of vaguely knew what it was, but I couldn't remember having ever seen it. So I said, well, yeah, in theory, yes, but let me have a look at it, and I'll see. So I had a look at it and thought, well, this looks like it could be a really great theatrical show. It's got all the right elements, and it's got the wonderful music of Irving Berlin as well. And so I said, yes, I would be very interested in doing it. And then we were then talking about who would adapt it, and we were talking about all the sort of usual suspects, and people like Charles Hart, who did the lyrics for Phantom of the Opera, and Don Black, who's a very experienced writer. And we were talking about who would do it, and just I don't know quite. Again, it's sort of one of those moments when I was probably just cockier than I probably am now. I just said, well, could I have a bash at it? So actually Kenny, who was the producer, and myself worked on it together, with a view to putting it together for the workshop. And the idea of the workshop was that we would show what we'd got to the American estate, the lawyers, and in fact some rather illustrious people were there as well. People like Irving Berlin's 3 daughters were still alive at the time. They were all in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Well, very, very old. And also Fred Astaire's daughter Ava was also involved too. So they were all there at the workshop. And I think in my head I thought, what's going to happen is that they will, well, hopefully they'll give us the go-ahead to do the show, but they'll say at this point we need to take on board a writer. But they didn't. They saw the workshop, they liked it, and they said, yeah, go ahead. So they gave us the opportunity to do a 4-month tour. And then on the back of that, they would see what it was like, as to whether or not they'd allow us to take it further, i.e. into the West End. And so actually, I was really surprised that at that point they said, yeah, no, this is okay, and we ended up rewriting it massively. But that's how that came about. So no, I didn't know anything about it, and it just sort of dropped from the sky into my lap. So I was really lucky.
Amazing. So we've already got some questions coming in, so they look great. But I did want to quickly ask, just how did it feel to win the Oliviers? Because there are 3 of them. It's quite mental. For a project that you were so involved in. It
was absolutely amazing. I mean, it really was, because I'd been nominated before as an actor once, and as part of the team for several other shows, but never won anything. So I'd been at the ceremonies and sat there with a sort of speech in my pocket, which never got used. So I was kind of used to that experience, and this one was they used to be done at the Grosvenor House Hotel, which is a sort of functional place, but this time they were doing it at the Royal Opera House, and it was televised as well. So it's a really big affair, and it's such an extraordinary building, that one. And we'd been asked to do I think it was the opener for the second act. So the whole of the cast were there as well, doing a big splashy, beautifully costumed number. So there was a real buzz in the building. So whenever Top Hat was mentioned as the evening progressed, there'd be this massive cheer from wherever the cast were sitting, and so there was a real kind of buzz about the evening. And also because I'd been, my introduction to theatre was through ballet, because my mum used to take me to the ballet when I was a little boy, like sort of 6 years old. and we went to the Royal Opera House on several occasions. And so I remembered this massive swagging curtain that they have, and I just remember the sort of magic of that sweeping back and revealing these incredible sets behind. And so for me, that sort of almost defines what the theatre is. And so to be there and then to actually win the award and have to go up on stage to make a speech on that stage was really extraordinary. And that by that time, unfortunately, my mum had died, so she never got to see that. But I was able to mention her in my speech, which was nice. So I kind of felt like it all sort of came full circle. So it was an incredibly emotional evening. And yes, if there had been any production that I would have wanted to win for, it would have been that one. So I sort of feel like I could die happy now.
Oh, lovely. I mean, we've got so many questions. Let's go for a more positive one. So rather than COVID related, so let's go for like, do you have like a number one audition tip for people auditioning for shows or like drama schools?
My number one audition tip is probably do your homework. So you really need to know, if it's an audition for a show, you need to know about the show, you need to know about the panel that you're auditioning for. So you just need to be as clued up as you can be. And obviously, I mean, that goes without saying, you have to be really secure on whatever it is you're presenting, whatever piece you've taken to audition with. But just you just need to kind of have as many facts at your fingertips as possible, so that if the panel asks you about the show, you've got something intelligent to say about it, and you've got a reason for being there. So why do you particularly want to be part of this production? You just need to have answers. So I think being prepared and and having done your homework would be my number one tip, I think.
Amazing. We've got a question in the chat from Lawrence. Hi, Lawrence. How long would you stay with the show you've directed once it's up? And thank you.
So as a director, if I'm the resident director, in the past when I was a resident director, you stay with the show throughout. So you're there, you go, you see the show a sort of set number of times a week. So your job is to stay with it, work with the understudies, be a troubleshooter whenever anything goes wrong. But as a director, you stay with the show as long, so you put it up basically. So you'll be there for obviously all the dress rehearsals, previews, right up until the opening night. Once the opening night is done and dusted, you tend to leave, and you don't ever leave, in the sense that you read all the show reports and you visit regularly, or if you can. I mean, it depends where it is. If it's off on tour, you can't necessarily see it every other week. But I do try and keep a close eye on things. And if it's a big production, it'll normally have an assistant or an associate director. So you liaise with them. You just keep in contact with them and make sure that any problems you're aware of, and any big problems you can go and solve. But I think there is a point at which, as far as being the director is concerned, you need to step away, and the actors need that space from you. They need to be able to go on stage, own it, not be looking over their shoulder or worrying, what's he writing tonight, what my note's going to be. They need to have time to make it their own. So I'm quite strict with myself about that. Once the opening night is done and dusted, I'll leave them for a bit. And then maybe come back, a couple of weeks later and give some notes or something, But yeah, I think that's pretty much how I work it. I just don't think it's helpful sticking around. It doesn't really benefit anybody, I don't think.
So this is going to be our final question, but we're going to go quite a fun one. So going back to your roles earlier, do you have someone who would be your dream to either direct with or act with, if you could pick anyone?
Oh gosh.
Dead or alive?
Dead or alive.
Is this somebody that I've actually worked with before? Is it somebody plucked from out of space?
Plucked.
Anyone?
Oh gosh. Oh. That's really hard, because that's just like, I could have anybody, couldn't I? I could work with just oh God, that's really thrown me. I'm going to think of people that I've actually worked with just to start myself off. Because the other thing is just too massive. It's like, you know, where would I even begin with that? You know, all the Hollywood actors that I really sort of look up to, or indeed the, you know, our extraordinary band of actors here, you know, the Judi Denches and the Ian McKellens and all that. But that's something I'd like to do. King Lear with Judi Dench. Actually, I'll put that aside. But, you know, now she's a perfect age. It'd be perfect. So people that I've worked with that I'd like. Oh, well, there's an actress that none of you would necessarily know, but I would work with in a heartbeat. I would put her in every single production of mine if I could. And her name's Tiffany Graves, and she was Ula in my production of The Producers, and she was also in The Boyfriend I directed recently, and I was in Chicago with her as well. I was an actor in Chicago, but she was in it. And she's one of those people who's not only multi-talented, can sing, dance, act to a really high level, but she's the funniest person in the room and always brings with her this just cloud of optimism. So I would have someone like her in every single production that I direct, because it's so much fun having someone like that in the room. So that's somebody that you won't necessarily know, but she would be up there, yeah. And then other actors who I sort of revere. Oh my goodness, that's really hard. I've just been working. Actually, this is another person that you won't necessarily know, but I've just been working with a young actress called Amara Okereke, who played the lead in The Boyfriend for me, and previously played the lead in Oklahoma at Chichester. And she's probably in her early 20s, sort of 22, 23. She's had a really great career since coming out of I think she went to Arts Ed. And I'd like to work with her because she's just incredibly versatile, lovely actress, and just has a real, just a sort of indefinable quality to her. And I'd love to see her taking on some really meaty roles, particularly acting as opposed to musical theatre. And then starry people would be, you know, people like, you know, Christian Scott Thomas, Julianne Moore, who else? You know, Matt Damon, maybe, Ray Fiennes. Oh God, I mean, there's just millions of them. Who, you know, these incredible stage and film actors. Yeah, I mean, when you ask a question like that, I can think of people that I would never want to work with again, which I won't go into. But as far as actually, sort of, if I have my pick of anybody, then it makes it very difficult, because there are so many actors that I revere. So once I've come off this call, I'll go, oh, you know, I should have said this, and you know, there's so many people, but there's a few. The sprinkling for you.
Perfect. I mean, great choices. We must say that.
You've got to love my Judi Dench, haven't you? I mean, Judi Dench, King Lear. Come on. I mean, you know,
we all want it to happen.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that's the one.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for your wonderful answers and for your time. This has been so much fun.
My absolute pleasure.
It's been great. And thank you to everyone who joined the call and for asking such great questions. Please like our Facebook page for more updates and opportunities. Our guest next week is Sheena Napier, an Oscar-nominated costume designer, for anyone out there who's interested in costumes, at 7 p.m. on the 18th. Oh, it's not the 18th of February. Our script is wrong.
Doing it again tomorrow.
On the 24th of February. I did the maths there. Register for the Q&A on our Facebook event, and the link's soon going to be on our Instagram bio. And thank you yet again, and have a lovely evening.